Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk about The Mandalorian, Chapter 7. I actually think this is the best episode that's done so far of The Mandalorian. It truly is a full expression of the mashup of space opera and Western, and it has a bunch of the elements that you might expect from each one balanced pretty well, and actually provides some real tension and some real surprises. So well done so far. The only negative thing I might say is that it does end on a cliffhanger. It ends with a lot of unresolved tension, and we don't know what's going to happen next. In an online series where you're not really limited on time, you notice the length of the episodes can vary quite a bit. You're not really limited on time. There's no excuse to have a cliffhanger like you would have on broadcast TV. It just becomes another way to string the viewer along to watch the next episode, to get them hyped to wait for the next episode. It becomes really a meta device. I don't hate it that much because, I've used it with certain serial publications, but I really like it when stories actually resolve in a single episode. As you can guess, that's what I prefer, is the more episodic format. Nonetheless, this is a really well done show. So let me go through a couple things that I think are really good. First of all, the aesthetics in the show I think are very unique. We finally get to see more of this planet that the Mandalorian's been on. We have them traveling through this hellscape with like lava flows. It looks pretty cool. We get to see some dark troopers or some black stormtrooper commandos or whatever they are. We haven't seen a whole lot of them in live action. I don't know if we've ever actually seen them in a live action shot. So it's cool to actually see, the black stormtroopers, which I appreciated a lot. There's a lot of stormtroopers in general. There's a lot of the Imperial aesthetics. We get to see a TIE fighter. We get to see TIE fighter open up. Some things that we really haven't seen so far in the Star Wars universe. So all of those things I think are appreciated. And there's a little bit of original thought to some of the costumes when we see this Imperial commander come out of the TIE fighter. It's actually, I think it's a very interesting, well-framed shot that shows the costume off really well. There's a bunch of events that are very evocative of Westerns. You have, a trek through the wasteland, if you will. You have double crosses. You have a setup for a standoff and a trade. You do have a standoff. You have shootouts. You have attacks by wild beasts, which is not really a Western thing. That's more of I would call it more to do with space operas, like monsters involved. You have it all there in this one episode, and it's paced really well. The tension really stays pretty high throughout. You're unsure about some of the companions that the Mandalorian's been forced into accepting. You're not completely sure who his allies are, and as double crosses happen, the clarity of who's doing what comes into better focus. There's some real surprises in the last part of the episode, with some shootouts and unfortunately, a character getting killed that you probably weren't expecting. But it's good when we have a long string of tension. Are they going to survive? And they actually don't. When there's a plot failure, it makes the viewer believe more that there could be a real failure in the overall narrative. So if you have characters that die, if you have characters that fail, it makes the reader commit more to the narrative. It makes them believe more that the good and happy ending may not happen. It really commits them to finishing off what you have there. And you can do this in a book. Now, the episode represents, in the larger arc, the transition from the end of the second act and into the third act. So the first act is really about exposition, and that represents the first 3 episodes of The Mandalorian. And then you have a middle act, which is what I call the chaos act. It's where the protagonist is on his heels. He's reacting. He's trying to figure out how to move forward with his objectives and his plans, how to conjure a plan to beat the bad guy, to overcome an obstacle, or to resolve the main plot conflict. The main plot conflict is how to save this Baby Yoda character. And indeed, that's what this episode revolves around, is trying to maintain the safety of the Baby Yoda. And so part of this transition is there's usually a battle that involves a failure. That's a transition from the chaos act into the third act, where we are pushing forward towards our actual resolutions. So this episode does that really well. If you're aware of me talking about these larger structures in the past, this is a good primer for it. So what we have in this really represents a failure point. We come up with a plan. So the protagonist comes up with a plan that's going to resolve the main plot goal, the main conflict of the plot, which is saving the Baby Yoda. So we're going to save the Baby Yoda by killing the Imperial that wants to capture the Baby Yoda. This is going to solve the problem. And so we conjure the plan that goes through it. We have some twists and turns that bring us up to the final part where, we're faced with a battle that looks like the odds are not on the side of the protagonist, the Mandalorian, and we get a big surprise. Now, if you haven't seen the episode yet, you can go watch it. It's good. If you don't care about this kind of stuff, there's going to be some spoilers. There's a big shootout that happens, and the shootout that happens is not the Mandalorian taking charge, but rather a bunch of shots coming into the room that they're in, killing the guys that they really intended to have to fight in order to preserve this Baby Yoda. And so right away in this moment, we have a complete shift and recontextualizing of the entire conflict. And it's going to represent a failure point when we see the second half of this episode. This is going to be the transition into the third act. And the reason it's going to be a failure point is because while this is happening, Quinn is the alien from the first couple episodes is going away to save the baby by bringing it to the Mandalorian ship. He gets killed and the stormtroopers capture the baby. So it's a failure of the protagonist. At the same time, the protagonist now understands that his understanding of the conflict is not sufficient, that there's bigger things in play. There's more important things that are going on besides his understanding of the conflict as it is. And so he'll be forced into a larger and more epic conflict. And also he will, again, have to readjust and determine a new path towards actually achieving victory. And that's usually going to be helped with some kind of B story. And I think the B story is going to be this former rebel commando. I think she's going to have some element of B story that's going to actually push them into success in the final couple of episodes of this first season of the series. So that's what you can expect. Now, this episode ends with a cliffhanger. We are surrounded by stormtroopers that are wanting to kill us, and we have a guy giving some exposition on like, this Baby Yoda is what I want, and you have no idea how important it is. We don't know what's going to happen. So they're going to be basically having to fight their way out and barely survive and not know what to do next. And then you have what might be called a dark night of the soul, where you have to really make a decision. The Mandalorian has to decide, am I going to let this Baby Yoda go and go survive because I failed? Or am I going to find a new path to victory, or am I going to go save the Baby Yoda one last time? Am I going to commit to the course of being a good character and go save the Baby Yoda? And so I'm going to guess that that's what's going to happen, is that they're going to come up with a plan to save the little baby, and the plan is going to have different things that are going to stand in the way, but we're going to have the secondary characters from the first two acts come in and assist the Mandalorian. What would be the equivalent of a B or a C story in a movie. They're going to come in and assist the Mandalorian in actually managing to capture the baby. And in that, we'll have a full revelation about what the baby's actual significance is as like a Force user, why this new villain that we hadn't seen before this transition into the third act, what he is, what he does. I don't remember his name exactly, but I'm sure I'll learn it as I go here, so I'm sorry if I'm blanking on that. But we'll figure out who he is, what he stands for, what his goals are through the course of that third act. So that's what you can expect from this one. Thanks so much for watching and listening to my little analysis here. Leave me your thoughts on the show down below, whether you think this episode, like I did, was probably the best directed. Deborah Chow does a really good job in this. Probably the best directed, best executed of the series so far, and probably does what people really want from the series, which is move that overall arc of the story forward and really provide some surprises and some reason to keep watching. But I do think that those small isolated episodes are an important part of that middle chaos act, just showing the Mandalorian trying to figure out where to go next. And then we have to kind of push him into the third act. That's what's going on here. So thanks so much. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, I sell books, Voices of the Void. If you are a sci-fi fan, this is sci-fi horror. I call this Aliens Meets Lovecraft. This is also contained within this giant volume, which you can get through the end of December, Fantasy Christmas Spectacular. $20.19 for this massive book here. It actually has this book in it along with 9 others. And the only book that I think I have that's not in there is Eyes in the Walls. This came out last week. This is a straight horror tale. So check that out. And I will see you guys next time. Make sure you're on my list, by the way, my mailing list, dbspress.com/list, and you'll get a free book.